The boardroom on the 47th floor had floor-to-ceiling glass on 3 sides, and on a clear morning, the Manhattan skyline looked like something designed to make ordinary people feel small. 12 executives sat around the mahogany table in suits that collectively cost more than Marcus Cole earned in a year. Victoria Harrington stood at the head, silver blonde and precise, her hand resting on a contract worth $50 million. The room smelled like fresh coffee and quiet certainty. Then the maintenance worker pushed his cart through the door. Badge number 447, faded green uniform. The kind of man these rooms were built to be invisible to. He walked past the cart, past the confused assistant rising from her chair, and plugged a USB drive into the display panel. The PowerPoint dissolved. In its place, a directory tree, IKI timestamp, and 4 words in the author metadata field that made Victoria's hand go still on the contract. M. Cole, Principal Architect, 2014. Who are you? Her voice had never asked that question without already knowing the answer. It asked it now. Marcus turned. He looked at her the way a man looks at something he has studied for a long time from a distance and is finally close enough to see clearly. I designed this system 7 years ago, before you had me escorted out. The room did not move. 4 weeks earlier, none of this existed yet. Not the hush, not the hinge of it. Not the weight of 30 years balanced on 11 seconds of silence. The Bronx at 6:47 in the morning had its own specific grammar, steam from a manhole cover, a bodega gate rolling up with a sound like a slow exhale. Just the number 4 train shaking the 3rd floor windows of a building where the elevator had been broken since November. Marcus stood at the bathroom mirror in a janitor's uniform, working the second button with the particular focus of a man who has learned to care about the things he can still control. On the kitchen table behind him, a stack of past due notices fanned out like a losing hand, a laptop with 3 tabs open. Stack Overflow, a POSIX thread documentation page. Federal Circuit Court filing 2019-1847, and a box of cereal with about 4 servings left. His bank account held $62. Tuition for Zoe's after-school science program came due in 9 days, $340. He had not yet figured out the $340. Zoe appeared from the hallway the way 8-year-olds always do, at full speed, incompletely assembled, trailing something important. Her left braid was tight, and her right braid was provisional. She was missing one of the front teeth that had already fallen out, and the replacement hadn't fully arrived yet, which gave her smile the look of a construction project mid-phase. She was carrying a sheet of graph paper covered in pencil lines and held it out to him without preamble. Her voice was matter-of-fact. "Dad, the load distribution is off, and I can't figure out which support." He dried his hands, looked at the diagram. The error was in the 3rd pier from the left. She distributed the tension load as if the span were symmetric when she'd drawn it asymmetric. He pointed. "You designed an asymmetric bridge, and then calculated it like it was symmetric. And the 3rd pier is carrying about 40% more than you gave it credit for." She stared at it, looked at him. "How do you always just see it?" Something moved across his face and settled before it became anything he had to explain. "Your mom taught me to look at the math underneath the pretty thing." Zoe was quiet for a moment, the way she always got quiet when Claire came up. Not flinching, not shutting down, just going still, the way you go still around something that is both precious and permanent. Then she took the graph paper back and sat at the table and started erasing. Marcus picked up his keys. He did not look at the ceiling, which was something he used to do when this apartment felt like waiting. He had trained himself out of it. Waiting was a specific kind of losing, and he had lost enough. To the 47th floor of Novatech Global was not Marcus's floor. His floor was 34, which housed the server infrastructure for the Western Region cluster. His job on 34 was to replace bulbs, empty bins, and stay out of the way of the engineers who moved through those corridors with the urgency of people who had been told, repeatedly, that their work was the most important work. He had been one of them once. He knew the walk. He was changing a ballast fixture in the secondary server room when the alarm went off. Not a fire alarm, not a drill, but the specific mid-frequency tone that meant the monitoring system had flagged a critical fault in production infrastructure. 3 engineers came in within 90 seconds. Derek Paulson, lead on the Western cluster. He trailed by Jordan Marsh from Systems Integration and Priya Nair, who everyone knew was being positioned for the next principal role. They brought laptops. They did not bring acknowledgement that anyone else was in the room. Derek's voice was clipped. Delta 9 partition, load balancer fault. Someone pushed a hot patch to production without staging, and now the config is returning null on every health check. Jordan was already typing, trying the rollback, but the config file keeps erroring out. It's not finding the reference schema. Marcus finished tightening the ballast fixture. He did not turn around immediately. He looked at the error code on his peripheral vision. The monitoring display on the wall was visible from where he stood, and he understood what he was looking at in approximately 11 seconds. And the null return wasn't a rollback failure. The serialization pointer in the recovery module was referencing a schema that had been deprecated during a migration 3 years ago. 1 line, maybe 90 seconds to fix. He turned around. His voice was even. The null return isn't from the config file itself. The serialization pointer in the recovery module, around line 4892, is referencing the pre-migration schema. If you update the pointer to the current schema and rerun the health check, the rollback should complete. Derek looked at him the way people look at something unexpected in a place where they did not expect to encounter anything. His eyes traveled from Marcus's face to the badge on his chest to the fixture tool in his hand, and the conclusion of that journey was visible and swift. Sir, this is a restricted technical area. If you could finish up and give us some space. Priya didn't look up from her screen. Jordan's fingers kept moving. Marcus stood there for 3 more seconds, long enough to watch the error counter increment twice, long enough to understand again that the silence required of him in this room was not the same as having nothing to say. He picked up his kit. He walked out. In the hallway, he stopped. He took out his phone and opened the notes app he used for nothing except this, a private, time-stamped record he had been building for 6 months. He typed the fix, the error code, the location, the names of the 3 engineers present, and the time, 9:14 a.m. 22 minutes later, the system went down completely. The outage lasted 40 minutes. Novatech's public status page logged it as a vendor infrastructure fault, and the incident report, filed internally, would eventually cross Rosa Ibanez's desk in Human Resources, where it would be processed, archived, and never acted upon. Rosa was a 58-year-old HR coordinator with reading glasses she kept on a beaded chain and a small spiral notebook she carried everywhere. She had been at Novatech for 11 years. She had seen the incident report format evolve 3 times, and the pattern underneath it not at all. She saw Marcus in the hallway near the stairwell, his cart parked against the wall, phone in hand. watching the red fault indicator above the server room door. She had seen the same expression on her father's face when he was at Mass, and the priest said something that wasn't wrong but wasn't right either. A man choosing patience because the other options were worse. She stopped. He looked at his phone screen, looked at the timestamp. "You knew, didn't you?" It was not quite a question. He didn't quite answer it, but he didn't walk away either. Rosa wrote something in the notebook. She kept walking. That evening, Marcus sat at the kitchen table after Zoe was asleep and opened the spreadsheet he'd been building since November of the previous year. 73 incidents across 6 years. The same architecture, a contractor or low-wage employee, always black, usually male, identifies a problem with precision, is dismissed without record, and watches the solution appear in a subsequent report under a different name. The estimated value of unattributed intellectual contribution across those 73 cases, $47.2 million. He looked at the number for a long time, when then he added tonight's case to column A and the names from his notes app to column C and the timestamp to column D. His phone buzzed. Unknown number. The message was 6 words. "We know what you're building. Stop." Marcus looked at the message, looked at the spreadsheet, looked at the door to Zoe's room, which was cracked open the way she liked it, a thin bar of nightlight crossing the hallway floor. He set the phone face down on the table. What he didn't know yet was that the threat had not come from the 47th floor, and that Zoe, that same afternoon while he was watching a fault counter increment in a restricted room, had been standing in front of a science fair judge who looked at her bridge calculations and asked, with a particular kind of gentleness that carries its own cruelty, whether someone had helped her. P.S. 147 held its science fair in the gymnasium, which smelled like floor wax and the particular anxiety of children performing competence for adults. Zoe had carried her bridge model on the subway that morning in both arms, the way you carry something you built yourself and are not yet sure the world will treat carefully. She set it on the judging table and stood beside it with her hands clasped and her explanation ready. Mrs. Patterson moved down the row of tables with a clipboard and the unhurried manner of someone who has already made up her mind about most things. She stopped at Zoe's table, looked at the model, looked at the load distribution calculations on the display card, which were correct. Marcus had checked them twice. Her pen hovered. "This is quite advanced for your grade level." The tone was not unkind, and that was the particular cruelty of it. "Did someone help you with the math?" Zoe's hands unclasped. "My dad." "And what does your dad do?" The father of the boy at the next table looked up from his phone. Zoe felt it, the slight rotation of attention, the subtle gathering of the room around that question. "He works at a tech company. He's really smart." Mrs. Patterson made a note. She did not score the project. She moved to the next table, where Tyler's model, a simpler design, a symmetric span, calculations that contained one minor error Marcus would have spotted in 4 seconds, received a red ribbon and a comment about exceptional effort. Zoe did not cry on the subway home. She saved it for the kitchen. After she put the bridge on the counter and sat down and let the day finally have what it had been asking for since gymnasium floor wax and a hovering pen. Marcus sat across from her and did not try to fix the crying with words, because some things need the full 60 seconds before language is useful. When she was done, she wiped her face with the back of her hand. "Did they not believe me because of you?" The question had the specific precision of a child who has been paying attention to the world longer than the world has been paying attention to her. Marcus looked at his daughter, 8 years old, gap-toothed, already learning to doubt what she knew was true, and felt something harden in his chest that had nothing to do with anger and everything to do with refusal. Your bridge is correct, Zoe. The math is right, and don't let anyone make you doubt what you know is true. Is that what you do? Every day? He looked at her steadily. Every single day. She picked up her fork. They ate dinner. He did not tell her that her question had just moved something from the category of professional grievance into the category of necessity. On the 47th floor, 2 days after the system outage, Felix Okonwo closed the conference room door and set a manila folder on the table in front of Victoria Harrington. Felix was 61, general counsel since 1996, a man who had spent 3 decades learning the precise architecture of institutional protection, which walls to build, which doors to lock, which records to keep, and which to route through channels that would make them difficult to find. Victoria stood at the window with her back to him, and the skyline below was performing its usual indifference. 73 documented cases over 6 years. Felix's voice was measured, the voice of a man delivering weather. Someone has been tracking the pattern with specificity, not a journalist. The data structure is too technical. Someone internal, or formerly internal. Can HR contain it? Felix opened the folder. Sarah in compliance flagged 3 access requests in the archive system last month. 2 were routine. 1 was for incident reports spanning 2017 to present. Cross-referenced with contractor personnel files. He paused. Whoever is building this case is building it correctly. Victoria turned from the window. Can HR contain it? The second time she asked, it meant something different than the first. Felix understood the difference, as he had been understanding that difference for 25 years. Yes, for now. Victoria looked at him with the particular expression of someone who has made a calculation and is waiting for the universe to confirm it. Then contain it, and find out who's digging before they finish the hole. What neither of them said in that room with its expensive air and its view of a city that had been built on exactly this kind of architecture was that the man they were discussing had once sat 3 floors below them as a principal engineer and had redesigned the core infrastructure that currently housed every file in that archive. That he had spent 7 years since his departure learning, specifically, how to make that knowledge count. The investigation Marcus built across the following 3 weeks did not look dramatic from the outside. When it looked like a man using his lunch break to read, and his evenings after Zoe slept to type, and his weekends to meet quietly with people who had stories they had stopped expecting anyone to ask about. Rosa Ibanez met him on a Tuesday evening in the parking lot of a diner in the Bronx, 3 miles from Novatech Tower, and handed him a cardboard box. Inside, 6 years of HR complaints, printed and filed by date, each one stamped with the same routing code. RES-NAR, resolved, no action required, 341 files. She had been keeping copies in her basement since 2019 in a filing cabinet next to her husband's fishing equipment, which he used and she never touched. I kept thinking someone with more authority would eventually ask the right question. Her voice was dry with the particular exhaustion of someone who has been reasonable for too long. No one ever asked the right question. Marcus looked at the stack. You kept these for 4 years. I kept them because I knew that the day I needed them, I would need every single one. James Tran was a former security contractor, 44, who met Marcus at a coffee shop in Queens on a Thursday afternoon. He'd been stationed at Novatech's loading dock for 2 years before his contract was quietly ended in 2021. In 2020, he had identified a miscalibration in the elevator pressure sensor on the service elevator, a specific fault, documented in the building's maintenance log under a different name, he attributed to a licensed engineer who had never set foot near the loading dock. 3 months after James flagged the issue internally and was told it was outside his role, 3 building maintenance workers were injured when the elevator stalled between floors. The settlement was confidential. James's name appeared nowhere in the report. His voice was even when he told it. I stopped being surprised. I started being angry. Then I stopped being angry because angry doesn't do anything except make you tired. He turned his coffee cup on the table. What are you doing with all of this? Making it impossible to ignore. James looked at him for a long moment. Then he wrote his phone number on a napkin and pushed it across the table. All right, then I'm witness 6. By the end of 3 weeks, Marcus had 11 witness statements, 412 pages of HR documentation, a chain of custody log for every document Rosa had provided, and a spreadsheet that had grown from 73 cases to 78. He had cross-referenced contractor termination dates against subsequent patent filings and found 9 instances where technical approaches documented in dismissed complaints appeared 6 to 18 months later in Novatech intellectual property filings. 9. Not 1. 9. He worked mostly at the kitchen table after midnight, the laptop screen the only light. The apartment around him quiet in the specific way apartments are quiet when the only person sleeping in them is a child who trusts that everything is being handled. Then, on a Wednesday evening, Rosa called. Her voice was tighter than he had heard it. Felix Okonwo called me this afternoon. I asked whether I had accessed archived HR materials outside standard protocol. Used that exact phrase. A pause. I told him I didn't know what he was referring to. He's guessing. He doesn't know what you took or when. Marcus. Her voice dropped. Before he called, I scanned every document and sent copies to 3 separate email addresses. Off-site. If anything happens to my files, there are redundant records. He was quiet for a moment. You did that before he called? I did that the day after I gave you the box. He heard the slight edge of something that might have been pride if Rosa Ibanez allowed herself that particular indulgence. I've worked in HR for 23 years. I know what a closing circle looks like. The next day, Marcus arrived at Novatech at his regular time, badged in at the maintenance entrance. And was met in the lobby by a security guard he didn't recognize. His vendor contract had been terminated, effective that morning. 2 weeks severance. No stated cause beyond restructuring of vendor relationships. There was a letter. At the bottom, in the standard legal footer, a single additional clause. Novatech reserved the right to pursue legal remedies for any breach of existing non-disclosure agreements. He had never signed an NDA with the maintenance vendor. He had signed one as a full-time employee in 2014, which had expired by standard clause in 2019. They were invoking a document that no longer held weight, which meant they were frightened enough to reach for a weapon that wasn't loaded. He rode the subway home with the envelope on his lap and $62 in his account and 9 days until Zoe's program fee was due. Chitani looked out the window at the passing stations and did not feel defeated. He felt the specific, clarifying cold of a man who has just watched his opponent show all the cards they thought they were hiding. That evening, In Rosa's basement, walls lined with file boxes, a single lamp, the distant sound of a television upstairs, Marcus spread the full timeline across the floor. Rosa stood beside him, arms folded, reading. The pattern did not begin in 2017. It did not begin in 2014. The earliest case in Rosa's files dated to 2003, but Marcus had been looking further. Through public EEOC records and federal court filings available to anyone with a library card and sufficient patience, he had found a case from 1997. The technical solution attributed incorrectly, the original identifier buried in a contractor log. On the contractor's name in that log, M. Cole, not him, his uncle, Marcus Raymond Cole, who had worked as a facilities engineer in this same building when it was under different ownership and the same management structure, who had died of a stroke in 2011 at 63, having spent the last decade of his career doing contract maintenance work because the full-time position he'd been promised after the 1997 incident never materialized, and because in 1998 he had been informally blacklisted from 3 firms in the same network. Marcus stood very still looking at his uncle's name in a 30-year-old document. Rosa spoke quietly. "How far back does it go?" Felix Okonwo became general counsel in 1996. Marcus didn't look up from the floor. He was here for the 1997 case. He built the legal structure that made all of it invisible. Well, this isn't an institutional habit. It's an institutional decision, maintained by one person across 3 decades, protected by the same language in every filing. He finally looked up. This isn't a discrimination case. It's organized intellectual property extraction. Structured, documented, repeated. He picked up his phone. He had been aware for the past 4 days of a black sedan parked across from his building. Not every day, not conspicuously, but twice in a week. License plate registered to a fleet company in Northern Virginia. He had photographed it both times without appearing to. He had run the registration through a public federal contractor database and found a single corporate parent, 3 subsidiaries removed, with documented contracts with the FBI Economic Crimes Unit. He had not told Rosa this yet, but he had waited to be sure. Now he opened his phone and showed her the photograph of the sedan, and the registration result, and the database entry. She looked at it, looked at him. They've been watching Novatech for at least 14 months based on the contract renewal date. He put the phone away, which means they have their own file. They've just been waiting for someone to walk through the door with the institutional memory to make it prosecutable. Rosa sat down on the edge of a file box. She looked at the timeline on the floor. 30 years of names, dates, attributed solutions, and the people who should have received credit and didn't. What do you do now? Marcus looked at his uncle's name one more time. Then he crouched down and carefully stacked the documents in order, when the way a man handles something that has waited long enough to be handled correctly. I finish it. He drove home through the Bronx at 11 p.m. with the windows down. When he came in, Zoe was asleep, her science textbook open on the bed beside her to a chapter on structural engineering. He stood in the doorway for a moment, the nightlight making everything soft. Tomorrow he would contact the number he had been holding for a week. Tomorrow the circle would close from both ends. But tonight there was just this: a child who trusted the math, and a father who had spent 6 years making sure that when the moment came, every number would be exactly right. His phone buzzed on the kitchen counter. A text from Rosa. Everything is copied. Everything is safe. Whatever happens next, They can't make it disappear. He set the phone down, looked at the ceiling, not the way he used to, not with waiting inside it, but with the particular stillness of a man standing at the edge of something he built himself, checking the load distribution one final time. Tomorrow, everything changes. At 7:04 a.m., Marcus sat across from Agent Patricia Webb in a federal building in Lower Manhattan, in a room with no windows and 2 cups of coffee, neither of them touched. Webb was 50, methodical, with the unhurried precision of someone who had learned that cases built fast usually fell fast. She slid a single page across the table. A summary of 14 months of parallel investigation, 17 companies in the same institutional network, a federal RICO predicate that had been waiting for one thing: someone with the internal architectural knowledge to connect the intellectual property extraction to the legal structures Felix Okonwo had built around it. Marcus read the page once. "You need me to walk into that building. We need a documented public presentation of evidence in front of the board. Something that creates a record they cannot later claim was fabricated or obtained under duress." Webb's voice carried no drama, which was how he knew she meant it. "If you do this, you are protected. But I won't tell you it's without cost." He thought about the cost for approximately 4 seconds. And then he took his phone out and looked at the text Zoe had sent that morning before school. A photograph of her bridge model on the kitchen counter with a single caption: "The angle is right, Dad. I fixed it." He put the phone away. "Tell me the exact time you need me in position." The maintenance entrance of Novatech Tower admitted him at 9:02 a.m. His former badge had been deactivated, but the vendor termination had not yet propagated to the building's secondary access system, which Marcus had known it wouldn't. He had designed the propagation delay himself in 2015 as a failsafe for emergency contractor access. The system he built to protect the building was the same system that let him back in. There was a justice in that which required no commentary. He pushed the cart to the service elevator, rode it to 47. The board meeting had begun at 9. The assistant outside the conference room rose from her chair when he came through the door. His voice was calm and specific. "Maintenance. Emergency electrical fault reported in the display panel. Facilities sent me directly." She looked at his uniform, looked at the cart, looked at the meeting through the glass wall, and made the calculation that people in assistant roles are trained to make. That the safest response to a confident man with a work order is to let him through. He was at the display panel in 11 seconds. The USB drive was in before anyone at the table fully registered what was happening. The PowerPoint dissolved. M. Cole, Principal Architect, 2014. Victoria Harrington's hand went still on the contract. The room arrived at its silence, the way a room does when something has changed that cannot be unchanged. Marcus turned around, and for the first time in 4 years in this building, he was not performing invisibility. "My name is Marcus Cole, Columbia Law, 2005, MIT Systems Architecture, 2007. Principal Infrastructure Architect at Novatech from 2014 to 2017, until a coordinated internal process removed me following a formal complaint about attribution practices." His voice was level, the way a load-bearing structure is level, not because nothing was pressing against it, but because it was built to hold. He set the bound folder on the table. "In front of you, 78 documented cases spanning 30 years, $47.2 million in unattributed intellectual property, and the legal architecture maintained by your general counsel since 1996 that made all of it structurally invisible." Felix Okonwo was on his feet before Marcus finished the sentence. This is an illegal intrusion into a private board proceeding, and anything presented here. Exhibit 34. Marcus did not raise his voice. He simply continued. An internal email from March 2009 in which you instruct the HR compliance team to document bias complaints using a routing protocol specifically designed to minimize legal exposure while maintaining deniability. Your words, your signature, tab 4 in the folder. Felix sat down. The room watched him sit down. That was its own kind of testimony. Marcus opened to the final tab. A single contractor log, 30 years old, the paper slightly yellowed at the edges. He set it on the table facing Victoria. This case is from 1997. The technical solution attributed incorrectly. The original identifier in this log, M. Cole. That was my uncle. He worked in this building the year Felix Okonwo became general counsel. He spent the last decade of his career in contract maintenance because the opportunity this building took from him was never returned. He paused. I have spent 6 years making sure his name appears in the correct column. That is the only inheritance he left me, and I intend to honor it. Victoria looked at the log. She looked at her uncle's handwriting. The way it listed a technical solution with quiet precision, no performance, just accuracy. And something shifted in her expression that was not defeat and not remorse, but something more complicated, recognition, and the understanding that the system she had inherited and maintained and defended had been running on a specific kind of theft for 30 years. And that the man standing across the table from her had just handed her the complete accounting. The conference room door opened. Agent Webb entered with 2 colleagues, badges visible, moving without hurry. Victoria did not look at them. She was still looking at Marcus. Who are you? The question was not what it had been in the cold open. It was not rhetorical or dismissive. It was the question of a person trying to locate herself in a story she had been narrating incorrectly. I'm the architect you never saw. He let that stand without addition. Felix Okonwo left the building at 2:31 p.m. with his private attorney and said nothing to the cameras gathering on the plaza. If federal charges were filed before the close of business, wire fraud, civil rights conspiracy under 42 U.S.C. Section 1981, and RICO predicate offenses spanning 3 decades. He did not go home that night to his apartment on the Upper East Side. His attorney released a statement describing him as cooperative. The statement did not use the word innocent. Victoria Harrington stood at the building entrance at 4:15 p.m. without a PR handler, without a prepared text. The cameras were there because someone had leaked the FBI presence, and she faced them with the particular stillness of someone who has decided that whatever comes next, it will at least be honest. Novatech has failed people who deserved better. I failed people who deserved better. That is not a legal statement. That is a human one. She took no questions. She went back inside. Marcus watched the clip later, alone in the car. Zoe sleeping in the back seat after a school day that had ended, for once, on time. He watched it twice. He didn't know what to do with it yet, so he put the phone away and drove home through the Bronx in the dark. 6 months later, Marcus testified before the Senate Subcommittee on Technology and Civil Rights in a room with wood-paneled walls and the particular acoustic quality of a space designed to make statements permanent. Rosa Ibanez sat to his left. James Tran sat to his right. The DOJ investigation had by then expanded to 4 additional companies in Felix Okonwo's institutional network. 52 families had received formal attribution corrections in corporate records and a financial settlement structure, whose specific figures Marcus had asked be kept from the press because he did not want the story to become a story about money, was moving through federal mediation. When the subcommittee chair asked what outcome he was seeking from the testimony, Marcus was quiet for a moment. Then, "I want the next person who walks into a room with something to contribute to be seen before they spend 6 years proving it. Dignity shouldn't require a 6-year evidentiary record." The room was quiet in the way rooms get quiet when someone has said a true thing without decoration. 14 months after the boardroom, Marcus Cole arrived at a building in the South Bronx that Novatech had built as part of its court-mandated community investment, an engineering campus 3 miles from the apartment where the cereal box had run low and the bank account had held $62. His name was on the door of an office on the 2nd floor. The title beneath it read Chief Architecture Officer, and below that, at his specific request, a second line, Institutional Memory Keeper. The office had 1 window. He had asked for 1 window. Claire had told him once, in the apartment they shared before Zoe was born, that small windows make you appreciate what's outside more. He had not forgotten that. He had not forgotten anything she gave him that still had weight. Zoe came in at 3:45, still in her backpack, science textbook visible in the front pocket. Her bridge model had won the regional science fair 2 months prior. She had fixed the angle herself, and the judge, a different judge, a Saturday competition across town, had asked her to explain the load distribution calculation to the room, and she had done it without notes. She dropped into the chair across from his desk and pulled out graph paper. "New project. I need to calculate maximum tensile stress on a composite span. Can you check my setup?" He took the paper. The work was clean, the variables labeled correctly, the approach thoughtful. He found one assumption that needed refining. She had treated the composite as isotropic when the design called for it to be orthotropic, and pointed to it without editorializing. She looked at it, nodded, started erasing. Outside the window, the Bronx moved at its regular speed, neither urgent nor defeated, just continuous. Marcus watched his daughter work, her pencil moving with the quiet confidence of someone who has learned to trust her own calculations, and she felt the specific fullness of a man who has put something back in the right place. On the wall of the main engineering floor, visible from the elevator landing, a plaque had been installed by unanimous vote of the technical staff. Victoria had approved it. Marcus had approved the wording. It read, "Seen or unseen, the work remains." Below it, in 12 smaller lines, the names of the people whose contributions the building had once made invisible. The first name on the list was Marcus Raymond Cole, 1997. The last name was his own.